I was an atheist for most of my early 20s. Like anyone who was forced to go to church as a kid, I quickly left church after I moved out of my parents' home. During my time as an atheist, or agnostic atheist, I didn't really know what to feel about paranormal experiences, or experiences that people have that are simply undefinable. My girlfriend, who I've been with for 3 years now, has always told me about strange experiences she's heard that's happened to her or her family members. These experiences were always related to the paranormal. Being a skeptic, I didn't really know what to make of it. I couldn't agree or disagree to these experiences. My girlfriend always believed in a god or higher power. I was skeptical at best. I remember her always asking me if I was afraid of death, and I said no because it would simply be just like before I was born. I would be nothing, and that didn't scare me. Now, the event that changed my life happened when I intentionally fell asleep on my couch and was pushed out of my body from my dream. Before that moment, a couple of days before, my girlfriend was telling me about astral projection and told me about the CIA papers about the gateway experience. While I wasn't really sure if this was possible, I was open minded enough to know that I don't know everything and would give nearly anything a shot. Around 19 or 20, I dropped acid a couple of times and had great experiences with it. So I don't know if this is maybe why I was sort of open minded to the idea that there is something bigger out there. But as I said, I was a skeptic first. So back to the astral projection. Keep in mind, this happened not too long ago. It was mid-November 2020. My girlfriend was out of town working. I'd just come across the CIA papers and the astral projection website. I was very curious and open-minded to the idea that I could leave my body. Hell, I didn't have anything better to do. As I said earlier, I was pushed out of my dream, literally pushed out and astral projected. This is where it got interesting for me. I was 100% conscious while out of my body. I just remember rolling out of my body. Once I did that, it felt like I had very little to no control of my astral body. I was just sort of floating until I told myself to stop so I could be still. I really couldn't see anything. I had no vision, but I somehow knew where I was in relation to my body. I knew I was in my living room and that I wanted to see, but I also felt a strong gravitational pull to my physical body, which is why I think it was difficult to move for me. In my physical body, I had this shirt around my eyes, and for some reason, I thought that the shirt was wrapped around my astral eyes. Once I tried to remove the shirt from my astral eyes, I was back in my body. I've had lucid dreams, and I have dreams almost every night. Astral projection is nothing like dreaming or lucid dreaming. Every time I dream or lucid dream, everything is kind of hazy. There's some detail, but when you wake up, you know it was a form of dream. But this was a completely different experience. I felt myself as I am. I felt that I had a body, but I was as light as air, even though I couldn't see. I didn't get that same sense of haze or fogginess like with a dream. I haven't been able to astral project since then, but from that moment I knew there was more to this life than the materialist outlook. From that moment, I've learned a little more about life, death, and the spirit world. When I was around 8 years old, I went over to my friend's one night for a sleepover. He had two older sisters in their early teens, and they lived with their single mother. She allowed each of her children to have one friend each stay the night that night, so we had a full house. The night started like any other sleepover, movies, popcorn, etc. He and I were in his living room, playing with action figures, when we heard a loud thud against his bedroom window. It was so loud, his mom came down the hall to investigate. We told her something hit the window and we were pretty scared because it was getting late and it was dark out. His window faced the backyard, which was fenced in with a 6-foot privacy fence. At first, We thought it was his older sisters trying to scare us, but they swore it wasn't them. His mum also said that they were all inside and accounted for. The oldest sister went out to investigate and said there was a handprint on the window. We were freaked out, but we shook it off and went on with the night. That's when things got really creepy. Everyone went to bed for the night. They lived in a 2-story house. His 2 sisters' rooms were upstairs, along with a bathroom. His and his mom's room were downstairs, along with the kitchen, living room, and an additional bathroom. He and I went to the bed in his room. His 2 sisters and their friends slept on the floor in the living room with sleeping bags and blankets, so they could fall asleep watching movies. His mom slept on the couch in the living room with the girls. Around 2 a.m., we were all jarred out of our sleep by the sound of his sister's radio playing extremely loudly from her room upstairs. Me and my friend woke up in a panic and ran down the hall to the living room. That's when we saw her light was also on and bleeding down the stairs. His 2 sisters, their friends, and his mom were all there and accounted for. All of us, including his mom, were very scared. Mind you, this was almost 20 years ago. There were no Alexas or Google devices. His sister's radio wasn't an alarm clock. It was one of those old school stereos with the equalizer and tape deck and all separate. There's no way the stereo or the lights could have been set to turn on. And when I say it was loud at max volume. It was also playing a station she didn't listen to. What was so scary is how visibly scared his mom was. She didn't even want to go upstairs to investigate. It couldn't have been one of his sisters because we would have heard them running down the stairs, and they couldn't have made it back to the living room fast enough. They were also as scared as us. We all tried to go back to sleep, but I didn't sleep well that night. Fast forward to a few years later. My friend and his family moved out. A man was living there that had a daughter, maybe 5 years old. He was going through a divorce and custody battle, so we didn't see him much as he was pretty depressed. But when he had his daughter, we would sometimes see him outside with her, absolutely elated. He loved her to death. I remember hearing my dad tell my mom one day that the court decided in favour of the mother and he lost custody. He wasn't even granted visitation. After that, I never saw the man again. One day, I got home from school and my dad was visibly shaken. I asked him what was wrong and he said that he was outside doing yard work after the bus picked us up for school. He said he then heard a loud pop echo through the neighbourhood, sounding like a gunshot. He was sure it came from the man's house, so we went over and knocked, but no one answered. My dad called the police, who found the man laying in his backyard, dead, with a rifle in his hand. I guess the depression from losing his little girl was too much for him. All I could think at the time was how sad I was, but grateful he waited until the bus came back to pick us up. Our bus stop was 4 houses down from his house. I was just starting middle school when this happened, and I remembered the night I had a sleepover and the weird events. To this day, my dad still lives on that road. I'm 32 now, and every time I see that house, it still creeps me out. So when I was around 6 to 8 years old, I would come down into my basement to play games with my younger brother all the time. He was around 5 to 7 at the time. We were playing Minecraft Xbox 360 edition, and were messing around in creative mode, when the world generation started to bug out. Half-iron doors generating in mountainsides, and corrupt villages were loading in. My brother thought it all looked a little weird, and he left to use the restroom. While he was in there, the TV started to show static and it began to make an alien roaring sound. The lights in my basement flickered and the Xbox shut off on its own. It actually never worked again after this. It really freaked me out. I got this horrifying sense that something evil was coming. I looked over towards the wall and saw this black, shadowy figure clawing out of the wall. It had these piercing, almost glowing eyes, and when it saw me, It ran straight through a wall, and I could see it standing in the darkness through an open door. I ran up to my parents crying, and don't kill me for this, I was little and didn't know better. And I told them that it was a black guy that came through the basement wall. They really didn't know how to react to this, so they went downstairs with me and showed me that there was nothing there. I was too afraid to go downstairs alone for the next couple of months. A couple of years later, my parents had their friends over and they brought their kids. We all went downstairs and I told them what I told you above. We decided it would be cool to have a ghost hunt. We set a ghost trap by coating the floor with marbles and put a Lincoln log house in the middle of the room. I thought it was mean, so it would want to break my house, and when it did, it would trip and fall and we would hear it. We went upstairs for some drinks, and when we went back downstairs, there was a clear path through the marbles going to the now completely demolished Lincoln house. The pieces were blasted across the room. And back into the room, I saw it run into the first time. My friends were now convinced of its existence as well. A few days ago, this is what made me remember all of this because it was a while ago, I had this creepy nightmare where there were tons of shadow people standing around my bed, and when I could close my eyes, I could see right through them and I couldn't look away. They weren't hurting me, just really creeping me out. Oh, and in case this means anything, I sleep in my basement now, right next to the room where I saw it run into. Occasionally, I can hear knocking on the wall where I first saw it, and other sounds coming from that room. And yes, still to this day, I can see it just out of the corner of my eye, darting around in that room, and when the lights are off, all around my basement. Ever since I was a little boy, I've always had this feeling of being watched in the dark. I didn't begin to have this fear though until one night I remember seeing a shadow on the wall and was unable to distinguish the shape. That is when my fear started. Growing up Catholic, I just thought it was a demon or a ghost and my house was haunted. But things began getting worse as I began feeling paranoid in any dark place, or sprinting down a dark road or hallway. I thought I was being silly, but then I started having dreams. The dreams were terrifying but short-lived. They first began when I slept in our first steady home. I'd just wake up halfway, unable to move and feel this crushing pressure on my chest. I couldn't explain it, but it was there. Talking to my mom, she told me it was simply sleep paralysis. Being 9 or 10 at the time, I just accepted it. I didn't start to become scared until I was a freshman in high school and we moved again. Things got worse. The dreams started getting worse and I started seeing things moving around, to the point I couldn't sleep without a light, or would stare straight up at my ceiling to avoid the dark corners. I began losing sleep constantly because every time I shut my eyes, I would feel that pressure on my chest worse than before. I brought this up to my grandmother. She grew up on Guam, we are Chamorro, and she explained to me how on the islands her family had a name for those creatures and called them Mr. Moon because of the way they cast shadows. She told me that Mr. Moon had followed her since she was a little girl and explained how she would feel chills any time before she encountered him. Well, not long after confiding in her the dreams, I saw the figure. It had these long, scrawny fingers and horns like that of a ram and glowing yellow eyes, and would perch at the end of my bed and watch me. Me being deeply Catholic, would start praying to St. Michael the Archangel immediately, and every time I woke up, this brought me some relief for a while. Every time I experienced it, I'd pray and I would wake up. The dreams happened less and less often. Well, one morning I woke up my brother, only 18 months younger than me, screaming. We shared a wall, so I heard him. I go running over to see what was wrong, and he describes to me my exact dream I had been having. We later had a priest come bless our house, but all these years later, I find myself down this rabbit hole, wondering if any of you know what this is or who. because I've been terrified for most of my life, waiting for it to come back. My grandmother is a famous musician. She resides in a century-old mansion in LA, where I visit her a few times a year. I'm unfamiliar with the history of this house, but I do know her pool was the first to ever be installed in LA. Anyways, 15 years ago, I was sitting at the dinner table with my mom, brother, and grandmother eating dinner. The dinner table faced a glass tiled window where you could see to the outside garden. I remember hearing the palm trees outside swaying erratically, despite it not being windy. Suddenly, a dark figure passed by the window. I guess that's when we decided to investigate. We went outside to the terrace garden, walking in the direction of where the shadow went. To our surprise, my Barbie doll, it was the Swan Lake Barbie, so it was limited edition, was sat upright on the bench. Not only did I not remember putting the doll there, but it was quite dirty and her hair was matted. That was kind of weird, but we chalked it up to me being a forgetful, messy child. Later that night, I went back to my room to put my Barbie back in my luggage bag, the usual place where I kept them. To my surprise, my Swan Lake Barbie doll was still in my luggage. And now I had two. It was as if the Barbie was duplicated. I ended up taking it home, but forever got weird vibes from it. Please note that this house is notoriously known for poltergeist activity. Maybe if this event occurred somewhere else, I'd be able to offer a logical explanation. But things like this are not uncommon at her property. She's quite a lonely woman, so she definitely wasn't having any other kids over. She lives in a gated community where houses are separated by acres. There was no possibility someone had left it there. And it was the exact same Barbie. Limited edition. This happened to me several days ago and I'm still unsure what to think about it. I was at Whole Foods to pick up an Amazon package because they have the pickup lockers right outside the entrance in the garage. I walk up to the lockers and there's this guy standing right in front of the lockers, just staring straight ahead. He doesn't acknowledge me, so I ask him if he needs help. Nothing. Doesn't even seem like he heard me. Just keeps staring ahead, not blinking or moving. So I go inside the store to get an employee so they can maybe call for medical or police help, and also so I can safely get my package. While talking with the employee, another shopper overheard me and said, "I'm glad you said something, because I saw him when I came in and thought it was creepy, and that was about 20 minutes ago." The employee comes out with me and asks the man to leave, but he just keeps staring. I get my package and get in my car, which is parked right in front, so I can still see him. I see the employee go back inside, probably to call the police. I look down for maybe 5 seconds to start my car, look back up, and he's gone. I see the employee come back out looking confused. He starts walking around the parking garage to see where the guy went. Can't find him. There's nowhere he could have gone in the few seconds I was looking away. There was only a few other cars in the garage, none of which were occupied. I don't know what to make of it. My friend suggested he was on drugs, but he didn't seem like it. Clean clothes, fit and healthy looking, no cracked out eyes or anything. Wondering if anyone has experienced something similar. I had tried doing DMT before this point and had some weird, difficult to remember or describe experiences. But this was an unexpected trip that occurred without smoking anything beforehand, just meditation and focus. I found myself in a sort of plaza, surrounded by seemingly demonic beings. Tansy growled, snarled, and made other terrifying noises beyond my comprehension. Then, quite suddenly, the words made sense. I stopped trying to hide and looked around. The people around me were not wholly evil nor good. They were people, but far from anything resembling human. Not as important, though. I realized the being talking to me sounded like Lisa Kudrow. Apparently, that was my brain filtering the information. She reassured me that no one was being mean. It's scary, and tried to be comforting, and that we started talking. Instead of seeking answers about the meaning or life or anything like that, I asked about her world. She showed me her job, and I freaked out. She was blasting away galaxies. She told me to calm down. It was nothing worse than mowing the lawn. Really. I asked where we were, and she told me it was kind of seventh dimension, 3 layers past time and space. I asked if there was much more dimensions beyond this, and she gave a shrug. Apparently, the ninth dimension was completely occupied by an incredibly self-absorbed mist that we're pretty sure we have contained now. It used to bother your world, but we try to keep it occupied. That was all she would say. Finally, she took me to the human corals. This is where most of us end up when we travel there, though not everyone on every trip. And there were these screens, through which one could view the experiences of people. It was through these screens that I saw my 2 co-workers visit the realm. This is my story. My thoughts are these. This place is the holographic projection of life from Earth. It seemed to be made of solid compressed light that was captured over eons. The city itself was built from light and could easily have been described as made of precious gems or crystals. I think, cannot yet prove, that this is a nexus point for the energy that comes from the planet, a place we all come from and eventually return to. I think that the knowledge of it has been lost, and there are pieces scattered throughout history and in various religions. All of this being said, there's still a chance that this all could be nothing more than my overreactive brain and imagination at work, though I feel there is too much coincidence at play for this. This happened about 5 years ago. I was living in a different city while going to university. This was in Sweden, so I'm sorry for any errors in this text. Firstly, I'm prone to lucid dreaming, and therefore just convinced myself that this was a dream, even though it didn't feel like it. I lived in a small apartment on the 5th floor with a pretty big balcony with glass windows that you could slide open all around. I'm very sensitive to light when I sleep, so I usually had the blinds shut, both out on the balcony and on the windows that were on the wall between my bedroom and the balcony. One night, I woke up because of a bluish light shining in through the blinds. At first, I thought it was the moon, but it felt too bright. I looked towards the balcony to see if I missed closing the blinds out there, which I admittedly had. But I realized it wasn't the moonlight I saw out there. It was much smaller and much closer. It hovered over another apartment complex a couple 100 meters away. I instantly felt a primal fear I have never felt before. My heart just dropped in my chest and I had trouble breathing. I couldn't look away and I couldn't move. Some rational part of me had a quick thought of, is this sleep paralysis? But then I felt eyes on me, many eyes, and I just knew I had to hide. I hid under my blanket and closed my eyes hard. I kept thinking, I didn't see anything. I promise, I didn't see anything. Over and over again. I had such an adrenaline rush that I was shaking. The next thing I know, it was morning again and my body was aching. I was in pain, but it felt like the pain came from the inside, like when you get lightly shocked from an electrical fence. It hurts really bad for a second, and it's just an overall feeling of ache and tingling. I could still remember everything up until I closed my eyes and hid under the blanket. The ache and tingles disappeared after a couple of hours. It was early November 2010, and we've just finished celebrating All Souls Day, or Day of the Dead, here in the Philippines. We lived in a small subdivision surrounded by kind neighbours, so we didn't really expect things to turn south that fast. It's just me, my brother, my mom and dad, grandfather and cousin who've been living in the house for about 6 months, and so far, so good. My mom's store is doing great. First time being able to watch Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and I've just started my Pokemon Fire Red playthrough when it happened. My cousin told us about the voices she heard at night, and the constant banging she feels underneath her bed. We shrugged it off as some nightmares, and days passed until she brought it up again, but this time, she woke up nearby the stairs at 3 a.m., and that actually made my parents a little worried. I was a kid, so I wasn't actually scared. To be honest, I'm actually pretty pumped to experience my first paranormal activity. My brother, on the other hand, was quiet for some reason. What my cousin told us the next day actually sent shivers down my spine. She was taking a bath, and when she poured water on her back, it parted ways like someone or something was on her back. Initially, it wasn't that scary, but I was reminded of Shutter, and boy, that scared me to death when we watched it. The scene on the ladder. It was then that my brother admitted that he can see spirits, actually, shadow and light figures. And my dad actually experienced participating in an exorcism when he was still young. The events that proceeded to unfold are just horrifying thinking about it now that I'm older. We had our first exorcism, and it wasn't what I expected it to be. She was just lying on the bed and saying weird stuff. I actually hoped that she'd levitate or rotate her hand, not gonna lie. She was able to rip a page from the Bible before becoming stable. My brother heard voices of different genders and age. What's worse is that she had to sleep in our room since hers is cursed or something. She slept below the side where I usually sleep, and in that moment, I've never wanted to sleep as fast in my entire life. The thought of opening your eyes and she's floating above you or staring at you directly in your face, ugh. The next day was kind of tame. My cousin was doing fine, and my grandpa just happened to see a lady in a black veil coming down from the stairs into the kitchen, which was just an extension of the house. I was outside that time as well as my parents and brother, so not the type of news we'd want to hear. The next day was the grand finale, good versus evil, as I watch everything unfold while eating a bowl of pancit canton noodles. It was the worst she's ever been physically, and it looked terrifying. She started doing incantations, to which my dumb 10-year-old brain responded with more made-up incantations. I didn't take it seriously at all. They decided to cleanse her room, which was even harder to do because of her brother participating in the cleanse and eventually getting possessed too. He looked at one of the images of my grandmother, to which he described the eyes turning black, and that's when he lost control. He was freaking strong, being able to take on my dad and priest's assistant. Eventually, she threw up a black necklace and decided to do a kill it on the dance floor, as witnessed by my kid brain. She looked into a mirror, and just like that, it was over. They took care of the mirror, and she was brought into church rehab. We didn't realize how many spectators we had outside of our house. We discovered that the owner of the house performed a ritual after the extension, so yeah, we had to move out. And then it's just the house is haunted. She's doing fine now, and so are we. According to some of our ex-neighbours, they'll still see figures inside her room when they walk past it. I'm from just outside the Wilmington, North Carolina area, where there was a lot of Civil War activity in rice plantations and cotton fields. Anyways, this all takes place in my old home, and it began with hearing pans in our kitchen moving around at night. Like any young kid at the time, this really scared me, and I'd always duck under the covers and hide. We lived in a small town home, and one night, I decided to build up the courage and go and check out all the commotion. And I'm not kidding, this was every night. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the pans and pots still rustling around like someone was cooking something. Maybe it was my dad or mom, I thought, but as I turned the corner to the kitchen, My mind and everything I knew or had known about the paranormal took an amazing turn as I sat there in awe. A lady, obviously a slave looking woman from the mid 1800s, I'd say, was walking around literally cooking or attempting to cook in our kitchen. Now, I know ghosts usually don't stick around long after you see them, but this one was different. She was friendly, had a nice smile, looked about mid 20s or early 30s, and had a white gown and a black apron. Somehow, I hadn't realized she didn't notice me, so I decided to try communicating and I said, "Hello, who are you?" "Martha," she replied. "Don't be scared." I was shocked I was able to communicate with her. I was able to have full on conversations with this woman. She told me about how she tried to escape the plantation, what life was like, and how she feels like being a ghost. Now, I know most of you won't believe me, but I swear to you, all I know what I saw, I know the interactions I had. Sometimes she would make food and leave it out, or sometimes I would wake up to her petting my head, running her ghostly human feeling hands through my hair. She was the nicest, most interesting being I've ever had an interaction with. And eventually, every now and then, 3 or 4 times a week, I would see her or be able to interact with her. And then suddenly, just as fast as she had come, she vanished. These interactions and events all happened within a 3 year period, and as silly as it sounds, I kind of miss her and wish I could see her again. I've always been the type to dismiss the inexplainable. Never really believed in ghost stories or anything like it. My mom, however, is a different story. For context, she grew up in a small town in an Eastern European country where people in general are fascinated by the weird and the unknown. As a young girl, my mom would always tell these kind of stories. How some of the women in our family were very skilled in all sorts of witchcraft. How she seen and heard things that she could never get an explanation of. I would always enjoy listening to her stories, but as the person I am, I'd never fully believe it. Stories where she would hear 5 to 6 year old me moaning at night, only to find that my hair had mysteriously been half braided the next morning. How my infant baby brother, who at that point would hardly even move, once rolled out of bed and hit the floor when she left him alone for a couple of minutes in the parents' bedroom. There are so many of these stories. Needless to say, I don't know if I'm going crazy or imagining things, but I've had some experiences of my own. I don't live in the town where my mother grew up, but throughout my childhood, we had a tradition of spending most of our summer vacation at my grandma's, who was still living in that town until she passed a few years ago. My grandpa died before I was even born, so grandma was living on her own in a 2 story house. My parents would often leave us kids alone with grandma in the big house. The town itself was generally very safe at that time, a sort of everyone knows everyone town. My grandma often had the front door open all day, which may sound very weird, but that was very common, especially among the elderly there. Well, this house is where I had both my encounters, which I cannot explain to this day. I must have been around 14 when the first thing happened. I was home alone with my 7 year old younger brother and grandma. Grandma had a habit of falling asleep in her chair, but my brother and I were both there in the living room when we saw the top of her head pass by the window into our yard. I rushed outside and so did my brother. Needless to say, there was nothing there. No one. Not only that, the window was so high up that it would be impossible to see anyone walk by it. My father tested it out, about 1.9 meters tall, and indeed we didn't see anything. I remember it so vividly. My first thought fell on my deceased grandfather. The second time was a couple of years later in the very same room with the very same people. Only this time, I saw someone enter the house and head up the stairs to the first floor. I didn't see much, just a silhouette. I didn't hear anything either. Naturally, my brother and I searched all the rooms upstairs, every closet, under every bed, every possible hiding spot, but nothing and no one was found. To this day, I still wonder what that was. I haven't visited the town or house since my grandmother passed, and honestly, I have no intentions of going there again.